Hey mamas, and welcome to the Entering Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Marie Bilger, a wife, mom of two, VBAC mama, and doula. Join us every episode to learn from professionals, special guests, and moms just like you, ensuring that you know what you need to know and discover things that you didn't know before. I believe in you. Let's doula this, and let's navigate the transition of entering motherhood together. In this episode of Entering Motherhood, we hear from Jacque Ordner, who is a lactation consultant and a mother of four. And in this episode specifically, she talks about the realities of breastfeeding and even more specifically about pumping. She discusses common concerns like having information overload on multiple topics pertaining to breastfeeding and pumping. And she also offers some practical advice on starting pumping, building a schedule, and preparing for the process of returning to work. She mentions how important personalized support can be and how to make sure you have the correct flange size and how to introduce what's called paced feeding, which we go into in this episode. So this episode truly provides so much compassionate and expert advice to help mothers navigate the challenges of pumping and breastfeeding, all while balancing work and family life. So with that, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to Entering Motherhood. I'm so glad and excited to have you here today and get this conversation started. So how about you go ahead and introduce yourself for the listeners?
Hi, yes, I'm Jacque Ordner. I'm a registered nurse and board certified lactation consultant and a mom of four. And I have the pleasure of working with Motif Medical as a clinical advisor for lactation. And I absolutely love all things pumping. We were just talking a little bit before, and I said I could talk about pumping for hours. So I'm super excited to talk about that. I also work in private practice, so I get to bring a lot of my on the ground, like boots on the ground lactation insights to Motif, which is great because they're super receptive to what lactation professionals have to say and what pumping moms have to say. So I love getting to marry those two parts of lactation practice together, and excited to be here to talk about pumping.
Yeah. So how did you get into this type of work? Like, what was your motherhood experience, or how did that kind of evolve, or when did you start working in this area?
Yeah, like most lactation consultants, I feel like this is kind of the thing that most of us say. I've had my own difficulties with breastfeeding. My first son, I have all four boys, and my first son was born in 2006. So don't do the math because that makes me old, but it's been a while. And there just wasn't a lot of great lactation support, especially where I am, which is a really rural area. And so then when I was pregnant with my second son, I was in nursing school, and I had a fabulous instructor who she had been a labor and delivery nurse and then went into lactation. And I got to see her firsthand changing people's lives with just accurate information and support. And I thought, wow, if I had had that with my first baby, we would have made it longer than 4 months, and I wouldn't have had so many tears probably. And just realized that it's not that breastfeeding can be very hard, but the thing that makes it so much more difficult is we don't have good support in many areas. And thankfully the tide is turning on that for sure. We have a lot more support available. Moms are so much more informed now than, when I was having my babies. And I love that. And I love getting to be a part of it. So I always knew I wanted to work with moms and babies, and then basically always knew I wanted to do lactation. So it was just a matter of going through all of the steps and getting all my clinical hours. And it's a long process to become an IBCLC. So it took a while, but this is what I always knew I wanted to do once I had been introduced to lactation.
Awesome. So kind of backtracking to when you were first entering motherhood, what other things were kind of going on, or what other struggles did you have? What other kind of experiences shaped your motherhood?
Well, really a lot of what shapes motherhood for me was I actually had lost a couple of babies to miscarriage before. And so my first live born child was filled with a lot of anxiety. It took a little bit to kind of get past the fear of losing him, which I can't control. None of us can control. We do our best, but that's outside of our control. And I just had to resolve myself that this is outside my control. And I just have to do the best I can every day and show up and do the next right thing for my baby. My first son was sort of a healing journey to get past some of those difficult things. And then I just decided I want to be all in for this. Like, sometimes getting your bearings in motherhood, it doesn't always happen even with that first baby. I feel like he was the guinea pig and I had to sort of get myself together, and he's fine. He's grown up into a wonderful young man. Like we made it together. Maybe I feel a lot of compassion for new moms because I know what it's like to sit there and just feel like you have no idea what you're doing and you're both figuring it out every day. And as long as you love your baby, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. That's so much to like look back on those early days. And now even like my kids are 5 and 3 and I work with new moms and I'm like, it's so much to like put yourself back in that like very early beginning stage and
Mm.
to know like externally, like, yeah, it's like, it's all gonna work out, like it's all gonna be okay. But like in the moment, it can just be, so overwhelming seem like I need to know all the information right now, immediately, like all of it. And
Yes. And I
yeah,
remember like agonizing over, do I use a pacifier or do I not? Or which bottle do I choose? Or it wasn't even a question of which breast pump at that point in time because we didn't have very many options when my first was born. My youngest is 8. So we had a lot more options by the time he came around. But, those decisions that seem so big and overwhelming, now that I have that perspective of having a grown child and, looking back on those years, they were not as big of a deal as they felt like at that time. And I think, people need to hear that this feels
yeah,
really overwhelming. But if you, mess up and don't mess up in air quotes, don't feed your child the perfect diet, to set the stage for their gut health, like it's not the end of the world. Those are big things to think about, but don't feel crushed by it because it's not the biggest thing about motherhood for sure.
yeah. So how do you work with new families who are going through all of these, big emotions, big challenges, trying to figure out everything? And so we'll zoom in specifically with pumping. What are you seeing people come to you for support there, and where are you kind of leading them down as far as a pumping experience and journey?
Yeah. So I'm sure that you see this all the time too, but there's so much like information overwhelm. I work with families all the time who are like, well, I saw this on TikTok, or I follow somebody on Instagram that's doing this, or my friend did that. And so they're getting all of these different messages. And so the first place I like to start is just sifting through what's accurate and what's not. Like, where are you coming from? What's your baseline for lactation information, for pumping information? And that way we're like taking away any of these maybe inaccurate ideas that are influencing what they're currently doing. And then establishing goals. So I love to just like get a history, what's going on with you medically? How was your birth? All the things play a role in lactation. It's not just how our feeding's going in this moment, but we need all of that backstory. And then, what's your lifestyle like? How does this fit into your everyday life? What are your goals? I'm not a breastfeeding at all costs lactation consultant. I obviously think breastfeeding is very important and I love it and I'm passionate, but it's not the only thing we need to consider when we're talking to families. And so finding out what their goals are and what makes sense for them, and then making that sort of personalized plan to meet that goal and saying, okay, is what we're doing now working to get us to what we say our goals are? A lot of people, their first encounter with a lactation consultant is because they're having some sort of pain or difficulty. So maybe they've had latch pain and maybe there's something not quite right about the latch. So then they're looking to introduce pumping to get their milk supply boosted because something's not working with direct breastfeeding. And so a lot of times that's the first encounter. and just sort of getting them to take a step back and say, I don't have to have this figured out by the end of this single appointment. we can we can have many appointments or phone conversations. Thankfully, insurance covers lactation care for 87% of the people that I see in private practice. So they kind of have that burden taken off of them to have it all figured out right away. Yeah, once we know what their goals are, we can make a plan that feels very like bite-sized. First, we're going to do this. Then we're going to do that instead of point A to point Z all in one go. We'll just take it in little chunks. Earlier, we were kind of talking about when to start pumping. One of the first things to kind of lay that groundwork is that general advice that if breastfeeding's going well, latching your baby is going well, we don't have to complicate it by adding in pumping. And I think a lot of people are shocked to hear that too with the people you're supporting, that they're like kind of gung ho about pumping right away.
Yeah, I think a lot of times they're worried about supply. And so they're like, well, I heard if I start pumping, then like it will boost my supply. And so I just want to start pumping immediately. Or right now, I think a lot of like the colostrum collection while they're still pregnant is going on. And so how does that all play into effect? Like if you're doing colostrum collection and then you're pumping like very early on, like what are you seeing if they're pumping too soon, or what would too soon be?
Yeah. So for colostrum collection, some people are really into that. It's really helpful, boosts their confidence to actually see something coming from their breast. And if we're talking about prenatal colostrum collection, I always refer back to their midwife, their OB, whoever has that really firm grasp of their medical history as related to pregnancy and is this safe for them. And by and large, it's safe. We don't have any really great research that says this has a huge bearing on breastfeeding success. So for anybody that's listening who's like, I don't really leak, I don't really have colostrum, that's okay. That's normal. It's normal to leak. It's normal not to leak. So don't be worried that something's wrong. But that kind of can give you confidence. And so maybe that has a bearing on how breastfeeding go, just to have that experience with how to touch your breast, how to express, you kind of get comfortable. So that could have some bearing. Once you have that colostrum, you have that sort of security blanket, if you will. So if something isn't quite right, you're like, oh, I have a little bit of colostrum. We'll just kind of pop baby off in the hospital, and that's not going to be disruptive to breastfeeding. So that's nice. As far as when to start pumping, is there a time that's too early? If breastfeeding directly at the breast, if you're latching your baby and that is going well, we can possibly introduce pumping too early if we do too much. So your body is really working off of all these postpartum hormones, especially in the first 2 weeks, but really for the first 6 weeks. And that's when your milk supply is building. I think a lot of people maybe start to see that their milk supply is coming in and they're expecting it to be this huge supply right off the bat. And it's not supposed to be, because your baby's tummy size is really small. They're just a tiny little human that's not used to taking nutrition by mouth. And so it takes a while for that to build up. Your supply will grow to match what your baby is removing from the breast. And so we can trust that process as long as the latch is comfortable, baby's weight is on track. Like there are metrics that we're, looking at to give us that confidence that things are going well. And if those things are going well, we can wait until about 4 weeks before we start pumping. And even then, it's not like a have to. It's just maybe at that point we would consider. There's dangers with introducing pumping too much too early. And everybody thinks that having too much milk sounds like a great thing, but it comes with its own set drawbacks, really big drawbacks sometimes. So I think that's definitely something when you're figuring, all right, do I want to introduce pumping? I want a little bit more milk. Remember all those hormones that I mentioned. We're adding pumping to regular latching. We're going to put that milk supply into overdrive. It's not just a little bit of an increase. It can be a really big increase that sort of takes over your life.
So about how far in advance, like if we're returning to work and we know that we're going to be pumping while we're at work, when should we start introducing pumping, or what does that look like?
Yeah. I want to mention too, even though I just said, we want to wait until, 4 to 6 weeks is kind of the general recommendation. If latching is not going well and baby's not nursing well, that's when we would, work with somebody to make a plan and introduce pumping earlier. So I just wanted to make sure I touched on that for anybody who's listening and thinking, okay, now I don't know, do I pump early or not? If breastfeeding directly at the breast isn't going as expected, that is when pumping becomes this tool to really work with our body to increase milk supply. But when we're just looking at going back to work, I really like to kind of hone in on that 4 to 6 weeks because it's a perfect time to also introduce the bottle. So even if we have a really long maternity leave, getting that bottle at kind of a sweet spot where, okay, latching and nursing at the breast is going really, really well. And we could go, 4 months because we have a really long maternity leave before baby needs the bottle. Baby may not take the bottle at 4 months. So there's kind of a sweet spot between like 4 to 8 weeks, really, where it's a good time to introduce the bottle. And so introducing pumping at that time makes sense too. At minimum, though, give yourself 2 weeks to kind of get used to pumping before you go back to work. And I know I was somebody that went back to work right at 6 weeks with my first two. Well, my second one, I was actually in nursing school and went back 9 days postpartum after having a C-section. So I 10 out of 10 don't
9 days?
recommend 9 days. 9 days.
How?
Forever. You did great. But
Was that like work required you to go back, or you decided to go back?
so my RN program basically said you show up or you're out of the program. It was very competitive. They did not care that I had a baby. So my dad was so sweet. My husband was working and my dad would drive me to class and because I couldn't drive yet after a C-section and wait for me with the baby or go run errands and things. And then I would come out and nurse the baby. It wasn't every day at that time, but 10 out of 10 don't recommend. But it worked out. It worked out.
Oh my
It made me
goodness.
really appreciate my maternity leaves with my last two babies for sure. But so then, I had the luxury of bringing my baby with me, which is a huge privilege. Most people don't have that. And it just worked out for me. But, I would have had to start pumping that early
Yeah.
had I not had that. When you're thinking about introducing pumping and the bottle, we want to think big picture. If you're at that 4 to 6 weeks and you're kind of, okay, I'm gonna do this. I like to recommend adding a 10-minute session after your first morning nursing session because the prolactin levels are higher at that time and you can take advantage of that. Most people have a little bit of extra milk in the morning and, kind of get familiar with your pump without the pressure of, I have to get a full bottle to feed my baby. Your baby's fed, within 30 minutes of finishing that nursing session. Just do a little 10-minute pump and get familiar with your pump. Figure out the settings, see are the flanges comfortable. Do that for a few days until your body is responding and you feel, confident in how to use your pump. I always tell people too, when you do the first pump, if you don't get anything but a couple drops, that's okay. When we do that little 10-minute first morning pump, we're kind of taking the pressure off. So it's okay if you don't get much and you're just figuring it out. But when you do that, you are telling your body, I need a little bit of extra milk. So that 10-minute pump after first morning nursing session is also sort of fortifying your milk supply, like building it up just a little bit so that if there are any dips when you go to work, you've kind of guarded against that a little bit. So do that for a few days and keep that up. And then when you feel comfortable, pick a nursing session where your baby's normally pretty happy and try to anticipate that by about 30 minutes. And you would want to pump a full 20 minutes to then replace that nursing session with a bottle. And you would want to continue that, just once a day for a few days. So you're both kind of familiar. And once you feel like, okay, I've got this down, you don't have to do a bottle every single day until, until you go back to work, but maybe 2 or 3 times a week, just so your baby doesn't. I mean, I've seen them take a bottle and then we don't offer a bottle again for a couple of weeks, and then they're not they're not going to do
Yeah.
it. So just going to keep up those skills.
Yeah, I know. There's like, I mean, so many scenarios that we could like spin off of because I mean, there's been people that, have started to try to go back to work and then they're hearing from daycare or who's ever caring for their baby, like, hey, baby's not taking the bottle. So then they try to like bring baby to work or whatever. Like they try to,
Yeah.
navigate all these situations. I mean, there's other people I know that have like exclusively pumped from day one. So they
Mhm.
never like had baby at the breast. You went straight to pumping. How can we, and like, again, it's like the information overload and like all these different
Yes.
choices, but like, how can we start to try to figure out like what would be the best plan for us or, like what kind of schedule to work on? Like, do you help families create a pumping schedule to go off of? And what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So just kind of to simplify it, if nursing at the breast is going well, you don't feel any pressure to introduce pumping until at minimum 4 weeks postpartum. And then that's going to depend on lots of factors. If nursing isn't going well, then I would highly encourage your listeners to work with a lactation professional to figure out, how to add in pumping and incorporate some supplementing of your own breast milk, ideally. But I mean, sometimes we just don't have enough, and we need to do formula, and that is absolutely fine. So that if it's not going well, work with somebody to know how much to pump. If exclusive pumping, not putting baby to the breast at all, if that is for you, that needs to happen right away. So just like you would nurse your baby right away, we would want to, get all those cuddles and then introduce pumping every couple of hours, just like babies feed. Even though they don't always feed every couple of hours, the pumping, you can definitely time it out evenly to get those 8 pump sessions a day. So, and that's kind of that first, how to decide what lane you're in there directly after postpartum. But when it comes to like making a schedule for going back to work, as you get closer to your return to work time, I like that last week before I go back to work, I like to kind of ramp up the amount of bottles we're doing and therefore the amount of pumping sessions we're doing so that both mom and baby are really comfortable with, all those moving parts going back and forth between breast and bottle. Do a mock day or a couple of mock days of what your work schedule would be like and pumping, for those hours of the day. So you and baby are familiar. If your baby's going to daycare, you can even do a couple of trial days where they're there for maybe just a few hours instead of all day. So it's like a gentle introduction. And then when you are going back to work and we're talking about pumping schedules, the big rule to, you know, rule in air quotes, sometimes we don't like rules, but just the guidance, I guess, would be you try to shoot for every 3 hours for a pumping session. That's sort of the maximum that we want to push it out. And some people need to maybe pump every 2 hours, but I know that gets, I mean, I'm a nurse. I couldn't go to the bathroom, let alone go pump every 2 hours. So I know that there are constraints there, but trying to shoot for every 3 hours is a good parameter when you're talking about your schedule. And then not getting too like, okay, I have a meeting. My pump is going to have to be, 30 minutes earlier this time, or it's okay. It's okay. It's always better to disrupt your schedule than to skip a pump session for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you said like the mock day because I specifically remember going and like, getting my hair cut and getting my nails done and stuff like and taking kind of the day like out of the house and off while like my daughter tried the bottle and things like that. And then when I came home, I just like pumped once I returned. So like she, I think, did better when she couldn't see me and I wasn't there
Yeah.
and she took the bottle. But when I was physically there and we tried to give her a bottle, she was like, why would I take this when you're literally right there? Like they somehow like know that that's happening. And then we did start her, I think like a few days earlier before like I physically went back to like work
Hmm.
fully. And then I even worked right across the street from her daycare. So I would go there at lunch and I would feed her instead of pump for my lunch pump. So
Yeah. Oh, I
I
love
was
that.
able to kind of like pump and then like feed her in person and then pump. So I was doing it like 3 times a day at work, like 2 times a day at work, but then like once at her daycare. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. And you know what? Being in the daycare environment, then your body is also going to pick up on all those, those kid sickness that are around so that you can make antibodies for her. So, I mean, yes, she's going to give you that biofeedback. Your baby's going to give you that biofeedback. But I do encourage parents, like, be in the daycare environment. If you go for drop off, ask if you can nurse in that environment too, just so you're spending a little bit of time and you're opening your body up to that biofeedback to make antibodies specific to what's in that environment that your baby's going to encounter.
Yeah.
Or at drop off, like, communicate with daycare and say, I'm going to be there in 30 minutes. If baby's hungry, just offer a half an ounce or something to tide them over so that they didn't just get a 4-ounce bottle before you walk in and you're full and then you've got a 30-minute drive home from daycare or whatever. Just that communication can go a
Yeah.
long way too. Hmm.
Yeah. I think it's like one of those things like, when it's about time that you need to pump, like you feel it
Yes,
or
yes, your
feed
body
them.
gets very used to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you help employers or do you help clients kind of figure out what they need to be able to pump successfully while they're at work? Like what kind of supplies or
Yeah.
how the room should be situated?
Yes, yes. So I definitely get, that question a lot. Like, I just don't know what to pack in my pump bag or, how do I have this conversation? So it does vary person to person. I've worked with, active duty military personnel who they're in a Humvee somewhere, like they need different equipment, they need different supplies than somebody who's one of my fellow nurses working in the hospital who has this beautiful lactation room down the hall. I really love to just kind of figure out, all right, what are the basics? We need to have a way a place for you to go to express your milk. We need a way for you to clean your hands and clean your pump parts. But then we need a way to store your milk. So those are kind of the basics that we cover. Obviously, if you have a really nice lactation space, you probably have a sink. There's probably a refrigerator in there, a comfy chair. Like, all those things are pretty available in certain spaces where you have a dedicated lactation room. Maybe you're a teacher and you've got to find, just some empty classroom without a door lock. Then we need to talk about, all right, make a sign, communicate with the people around you. I'm going to be pumping at such and such time. I just want to warn you. So I'll be in that room. So, knock before entering. And ideally, it's great if I'm not interrupted, not because I don't want to talk to you, but because it could impact how my pumping session goes. If you're out in the middle of nowhere, there are like sprays and wipes that you can use to clean your pump parts. But ideally, we're able to rinse the milk off of them first. So I've had some people who will bring bottled water just to be able to rinse the milk off and then use those kind of sanitizing options. The fridge pack, as it's called, where you take your parts and, maybe put them in a Ziploc bag or in a container and stick them in a refrigerator or a cooler, though that's not necessarily the CDC and the World Health Organization wouldn't say that's ideal. It is better than nothing, and we know that breast milk is safe to even just stay out at room temperature for at least 4 hours. The Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine would even extend that period a little bit. So we can kind of take that logic and figure out, okay, it's ideal for me to, follow all of those steps set forth by the CDC, but that's not always practical if you are that person in a Humvee out, away from everything. So maybe you need a cooler and you're putting your parts in a Ziploc bag because that's the only option that you have. Maybe we are talking about, like, I have a limited amount of time and we're just rinsing the parts and using the microwave sterilizer steam bags. Motif has those bags, and I'd love to give those as baby shower gifts because it's something people don't think of. And those, you just put a little water, put them in the microwave, and your parts are not just clean, but they're sterilized and, well, sanitized. And so, there are lots of creative options. The breast milk chillers that are out now. I've seen people use those. But also a lower cost option is maybe just a really high quality thermos. And we're, making use of all these different things. But to meet those basics, so we have to have a place to pump. We have to have a way to clean our hands and our pump parts, and we have to have a way to store milk. So those are the three big categories that people need to think through when they're figuring out how they're going to pump when they go back to work.
Awesome. Well, I mean, like you said, like we could probably talk about pumping all day and there's like so many details. And I think it's like one of those things like it is helpful to get an IBCLC to talk through like in detail and a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of information out there. But what would you kind of want new moms to know about pumping that might be relevant to them, like just like a final like piece of advice or words of wisdom or
Yeah.
something that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah. So two things first come to mind. You can find pumping schedules. You can find reviews on pumps. All of that's not going to be anything new that I'm going to tell you that you can't find elsewhere. But probably the two keys I think for successful pumping, you have to do it often enough. Okay. That's just kind of a given. If we're not removing milk often enough, our body's not going to make milk. So just remember that's sort of the foundation. Whether we're nursing or pumping, we have to do it often enough. But the two kind of pieces that would make pumping maybe more successful or the full experience more successful would be know your flange size. And if you don't know how to find your flange size, work with a lactation consultant, somebody that has a lot of experience at that. And we know now that we want a flange that's really close to that nipple size and not adding all these extra millimeters. And Motif has been amazing at responding to this. So all of the new products that we're releasing come with multiple flange size options, all these inserts that come like the new Motif Aura Glow is a wearable pump that has 5 different sizes in the box. We have collection cups. So there are options. And we want you to know your flange size. That's going to make pumping more comfortable, more effective. The second thing would be learn about paced bottle feeding, PACED bottle feeding. I cannot tell you the number of times somebody's pumping and they're making a great amount of milk and they go to daycare and pick up their baby and they're like, oh, your baby drank 18 ounces today. Well, 25 ounces is the average intake in 24 hours for a breastfed baby. And you're telling me my baby took, 3/4 of that already at daycare and I only pumped 12 ounces today or whatever. So knowing how to do paced bottle feeding and how to teach it to your daycare provider, your childcare provider can alleviate many, many problems. So there are some great YouTube videos and some instruction. I would encourage people to look into that when they're starting to introduce bottles and helps your baby go back to the breast more easily. So yeah, know your flange size. And then on the other end of it, kind of have an idea how to pace that feeding so that it doesn't disrupt the breastfeeding relationship.
Yeah. I remember with both of my kids, it was always difficult to navigate daycare when they were comparing how much my children were drinking to the formula-fed babies, and then they would say, "She drank the whole bottle and she still seemed hungry." And I'm like, "Well, how quickly was she, like, eating
Right.
the bottle?" Like, so it's that pace feeding does really make a difference because they're used to the breast just slowly releasing the milk, and they're getting it over a longer period of time. And then with the bottle, it's like so quick and they get so much at once. And so if it's not like that long drug out time, like, I mean, after a few minutes, she was content and she was fine. But those like, first 5 minutes of getting all of the milk before it even hit her stomach, of
Right.
course
Yeah.
she
You got to
was
give
upset.
your
Yeah.
brain time to catch up
Yeah.
with your belly. I always
Yeah.
say it's like you go out and eat, a Big Mac and a large fry. I don't even eat McDonald's, but that's what comes to mind. You just shove that in your face in 5 minutes. You could still feel hungry right after that. It takes a minute for or you go eat a big dinner and you don't feel that full until the ride home and it hits you. The same thing happens with our babies. If they're guzzling down a bottle,
Yeah.
that's not going to have the same effect as that slow feed. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I love that you brought up the difference between formula and breast milk. Like we need to keep increasing that formula amount and that we definitely need to do that. But with breast milk, we don't. Your average intake for a breastfed baby is 25 ounces from about 4 to 6 weeks all the way up to 6 months when we introduce solids. So I just think that's such an important thing for people to know. I'm so glad you mentioned
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And just being like solid in that, because there was so many times that the daycare would be like, you have to send in more milk. And I'd be like, this is all that I'm producing. Like,
Hmm.
like this
Hmm.
is what they're eating at home. This is what we eat, when they're not here. And
Yes.
so it was really kind of staying firm in this is exactly what they need and this is how much that they need and they're content. So, and it's hard to hear like that sometimes as the mother of your children to be like, I'm not feeding my baby enough. Like, what do you mean?
All right. There are
But
other ways to comfort a baby than giving them a bottle too. I think that's,
yes,
my parents, that was the first thing they wanted to do for our kids. And I'm like, I know this is from a place of love, but there are other ways
yes,
to soothe them when I'm not here. Yeah,
yes.
very important.
Ah, well, I mean, thank you so much. Like, how can we get in contact with you? Give us like all the details of how to reach you and get in contact with you or to learn more.
Yeah. So motifmedical.com is the website for Motif. And within that website, there's a blog. Myself and a midwife actually are on the team. We write the blog content where you can find a ton of free breastfeeding and pumping information. And of course, we're on social media. So we put those blogs out. We'll also do like some live Q&As and things on Instagram. So definitely follow Motif Medical to get those notifications because Rebecca, who is the midwife, she has a ton of information. She's great. And we both put out blogs and live Q&As regularly.
Very awesome. That's so, yeah, it's always great to just have the resources out there and the connection.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you, mamas, so much for listening. Remember, you are a rock star. I believe in you. Let's doula this. Let's crank it up a notch and let's kick it into high gear together. Hit that subscribe button, share this episode with a friend, message me, email me, call me, beat me. You know how to reach me. We're doing this, mamas. I am so excited to catch you here next week. This is your one-stop go-to place for helping you find the resources you need to make the best choices for you and your family during pregnancy, birth, and most importantly, postpartum. See you later, mamas.